O'Donnell, Buin.
Present, aye.
Okay, thank you. McGuire,
Present, and I.
Narayanan, Narayanan.
Saw him earlier. He was on earlier.
Yep, I see you trying to say present and I just don't hear you. Yep, I got you. Patrick? Wright?
Present, aye.
Sanger?
Present, aye.
Schember?
Present, aye.
Stephenson?
Present and aye.
Swanson? Tolbert?
Here.
Ulrich?
Present, aye.
Winchell?
Present, aye.
Washi?
Present, aye.
Is that it, Jenna?
Yes, Chair, and Holberg responded that she's present and voting yes. She's just having technical difficulties.
Okay, good. We're getting a lot of echoing, Jenna, on your microphone. I don't know what kind of a situation you're in or what system you're using, but there's a lot of, at least on my computer, a lot of echoing.
Yep, I'm in a conference room, but I can switch to a cell phone.
Okay. All right. So the next portion of the agenda is so the agenda is approved. Welcome again, everybody. And now we're on the reports portion of the agenda, and the TAB's chair report is going to be brief. No exec committee meeting this particular month. And the one thing to report on would be that the Governor Walz has determined that he wants to look, here we go yet again, looking at the governance model for the Met Council. And there's been a committee that's been requested to serve, and there are several members of the TAB on that committee. It's being chaired by Commissioner Holberg, and I think she was present today, wasn't she? Yeah, she's with us. And we're off to a roaring start with our first meeting, which was a backgrounding meeting for many folks that already were well grounded, I think, in the business of the Met Council. I'm on there as well, Commissioner McGuire, George Schember, and then I'll read who else is on there. Peter Bell, former chair, Patrick Bourne, the former chief administrator, Jay Coles, Elizabeth Couts, mayor of Burnsville, Douglas Loon from the chamber, Connie Sahibjam, many of you remember him from his days at MnDOT. I mentioned George Schember and Aline Churumoff, who used to be the chair. Tom Weaver was the chair, or the chief administrator, I guess. Janet Williams, mayor of Savage. Pahua Hoffman, formerly with the Citizens League. And then Jerry Zhao, who is over at the University of Minnesota with the Humphrey School. So it's a good group. I think we'll have some good discussions here as we work through the next several months and come up with some recommendations with regard to the governance model for the Metropolitan Council. And I think that's in anticipation that it will come up, as it always seems to do at the legislature, as an issue around funding for transportation and transit related matters. So let's get out in front of it and deal with it, and then we'll have something for the legislature to think about. So that's it for me from a reporting standpoint.
Yes. Don't you want to talk about Southwest LRT?
Well, I thought that Deb Barber might want to mention that.
Apologize.
Yeah, I'd love to, but we'll get there. And so thank you, Mayor. And Mike Barnes, MnDOT.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I don't have anything specific, just if there's questions.
Okay, any questions for MnDOT on any of the projects they're working on? Just generally, Member Barnes, are you getting, is your work generally on schedule everywhere, especially the project around the airport?
Correct, yes. Our projects are pretty much on schedule, and they're going well. The low traffic has helped overall across the metro. And then in our new projects that we're putting out, we're still hitting letting dates, and the bids are still coming in pretty reasonable. So things are going well considering.
Good. That prompt any questions for
Mr. Chair.
Barnes?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Look.
I just had a question for Member Barnes in terms of the $15 million build grant that was recently awarded to the Rum River Bridge on Highway 10. I know that MnDOT had a shortfall, I believe, of about $14 million on the 47 Ferry Street 10 bridge. And I'm wondering, in terms of, the question would be in terms of color of money, are you able to transfer what dollars you would have used then on the Rum River Bridge to cover that funding gap on the 47-169 bridge?
Yeah, we'll have to kind of go offline and look through. I'll have Melissa Barnes look through it too. But if out of this is, now that the Rum River is covered, if there is some of this where there still were some gaps, even though it showed that we were filling it, we were still filling it from kind of pulling from another spot. So we'll have to look. It would be, a small amount, as you had mentioned, if there is anything. But the overall funding up in that area, there's still a whole bunch of different projects that we still need to look at what we can contribute. So there's, as you know, there's 3-4 combinations of different things up there. So we'll work offline on that.
Very good. Anything further, Commissioner Look, on that? Any follow-up?
No, I'm just interested in knowing how the whole funding scenario comes together. 2022 start date on that. So obviously we want to make sure that the funding is in place so we can continue to achieve that date.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And that is, I was going to leave it to Commissioner Look to update from the grant, but that was really good for the state for us to be able to get that grant. And we got another one on 14. So that's definitely helpful in these times with the funding the way it is. So it was kudos to all those that worked together to get that grant. So appreciate it.
Because of the low traffic volumes, do you anticipate that any of the projects you're working on will be done ahead of schedule?
And we've had some that are, but then again, there's still combinations of things. So even though the traffic was lower, than even some of the supplies at times were not coming in the same way. So there's been kind of the pluses and minuses, but there are some that have been done and moved up earlier. So it hasn't been universally across the board, but it's definitely been better than what we anticipated when we kicked off this spring.
Good. All right. Well, thank you, Member Barnes. I saw Todd Bewin is with us today from MPCA. Todd, anything to report? You're back from taking kids to college and all those things. They haven't come back home yet, have they, with COVID or anything?
No, thank you for mentioning that, Mr. Chair. My son, I took him down to Gustavus Adolphus, and they just started with freshmen for 1 month. And so they're still in that period and things are going okay.
Good.
Before they've had all the rowdy upperclassmen come on campus. So we'll see. And then I also had a son get married in the last few weeks, and my daughter's getting married this Saturday. So it's been a busy time. We're getting things done in 2020 that we had wanted to get done, but they're just looking quite a bit different than they would have otherwise. So
yeah, well, congratulations on those weddings.
Thank you. For the MPCA, I'll just update on 2 things that I usually talk about. Clean Cars rulemaking. Although timelines have changed, we're continuing to move forward with that rulemaking. We anticipate publishing a draft rule and all the technical supporting information this fall yet. And then there will be a public comment period, and we're moving toward a hearing in front of an administrative law judge eventually. Timelines are still a little uncertain, but that continues to be an effort we're working on. And then the second thing is just the Volkswagen settlement, and we're currently in a period where we have 3 requests for proposal out. One is electric vehicle fast chargers on those highway corridors that have been designated into the outstate, connecting the metro outstate into greater Minnesota. And then we also have an RFP for electric school buses to replace diesel, and then for heavy-duty off-road replacements to replace diesel vehicles as well. So That's all I have. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Member Bewan about some of the activities going on with MPCA or the Volkswagen settlement monies? What's the timing, Member Bewan, on the anticipated timing on completing that 2,500 lane miles, I think, of coverage on the electrical charging stations?
You know, I don't necessarily know. I think it's a couple of years. I don't know if anyone on the call here has a greater level of detail on that. I know the grant period, our grants are continuing, and it's a process. Once the grants are awarded, I think there's, you know, generally a year or even more for the actual work to be done. So, but I think it's a couple of years would be a good estimation of that.
Good. All right. Thank you. Any questions for Member Bewan? All right. Thank you. And then on to Carl Crimmins. Member Crimmins, nice to have you with us today, and your MAC report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And starting out, things are slowly improving. And I just want to mention that highway work, I've been at the airport a couple times in the last couple weeks, and it was pretty smooth coming in off 494. You have to go to 494 now and then come down 5 to enter the airport. And the traffic is moving pretty smooth. But passenger activity, at the last week of August, which we have numbers for, we had 80,000 passengers go through TSA. And last year, we had 240,000 passengers go through TSA at this time. So it's improving. It was 15,000 in the first week of April. So we went from 15,000 to 80,000. But our passenger enplanements, which are people entering through TSA here and passengers changing flights here, are still down 75% from 2019. And on weekly operations, we had 478 this year in August. And last year in August, we had 1,166 flights. So you can see it's improving, but it's still way down. Parking has gone up. On April 1st, we had 1,000 cars parked at the airport. August 1st, we had 4,000 cars parked at the airport. So travel is improving. I was in the terminal, and it seemed busy to me when I was walking through the terminal. I was surprised, but I thought it was more people than what these numbers are showing. But again, it is improving. At least we can say that much. And there are concessions open. Only a few are open full-time, but 25 of them are open reduced hours in Terminal 1, and 4 are open full-time at Terminal 2, and 2 are open with reduced hours. So things are improving, and we've shifted cleaners. They're cleaning the bathrooms once, scheduled in the evening. We used to do 4 times an evening. They're only cleaning the bathrooms 3 times in the evening, so that extra time is spent out in the public areas, in the high-touch areas. We moved the cleaners over. We changed their contracts, so now they can do more in the evening hours in high-touch areas, as well as during the day. You'll see crews of people going through the airport. We wanted them to be visible to the travelers, so you can see them. They have special carts with disinfectant and rags and gloves and everything else. So you can see the cleaners moving through the airport along with the passengers. So that's all I have at this time, Mr. Chair. I stand for questions.
Yeah, they're very interesting information every month from you as we see the build back continue. It's good to hear. Questions for Member Crimmins? Anybody? Yes, Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I love to ask questions of you, Carl, because it's to get the answers from Mac. I'm just curious, and I asked this question last time about, how many of the airlines are really practicing the social distancing that I know Northwest is really doing, and I'm not flying, but if I did, I would only want to fly Delta, I should say. Are the other airlines, I just haven't checked into the other airlines, are they following suit with Delta, or is it just Delta that's being the one that's keeping the middle seats open and things like that?
Well, Delta has pledged to keep the middle seat open until next year. Southwest has pledged to keep the middle seat open until Thanksgiving. And then at Thanksgiving, they're going to review their policy and see what goes on from there. I've heard stories about American and United. They've been canceling flights and doubling up flights, taking 2 flights and making them into 1 and using the middle seat. So there's nothing, I mean, it's the airline's prerogative to do those things, unless the FAA steps in and demands something different. But Delta seems to be improving, and their numbers are going up. Their flights are going up. No international flights, very few international, I should say no. There's very few international flights. There's not a lot of countries we can go to if you're a U.S. passport holder. You're not accepted in a lot of places right now. So it doesn't help international travel at all. But the local travel, like I say, Southwest and Delta are the main players in keeping the middle seat open.
Thank you for that. And that's what I'm hearing. My friends are only flying there who are flying. But that's good to know. Thank you.
Sure.
Good. All right. Other questions or comments? Yes, Member Foster. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question. Is there a worry in framing the increase of traffic, like people traffic at the airport? Is there worry in framing that as a positive thing, just in light of COVID right now?
No, we've taken quite a few steps, you know, with plexiglass guards around the TSA people, at the gate check people, at the ticket counters. We have I think I mentioned this last month, we have 250 remote, what do you call it, hand sanitizers, non-touch hand sanitizers throughout the terminals. And then even on the ballards, where you're going through lines, the serpentine lines that get through TSA, they have marks spelled out for a 6-foot distance. So they are spreading people out as much as they can. And, you know, the airport, even though the governor passed a mask mandate, the airport took a policy up that if you enter the airport, you have to be masked. So not only if you don't mask, we will supply the mask. The authorities are there to police this, and you have to wear a mask inside the airport.
Member Foster.
No, I appreciate all of the effort that is being made to make the airport safe for travelers. It's less a question about the safety protocols in place and more about how it's being messaged. I know that Metro Transit right now is not, like, they're not saying, they say that transit is safe, but they're not praising like an increase in ridership. So I guess my question is, like, are there worries when you say that an increase in, excuse me, sorry about that. I need to clear my throat on speaker. As like, if we say there's an increase in travelers and it's a positive thing, will that contribute to messaging like, hey, it's safe to travel, come do it, like come fly more?
I think it is. I think this lull that we're going through right now has allowed us time to come up with new procedures and new protocols. I mean, we have misters going around the airport at night, spraying those mist, the sanitizing mist throughout the airport for the hard reach places. So I think that between the cleaners and MAC staff, this is the time when they can experiment and get better procedures and better practices put in place. And I think even if you go to the website, the airport website, it's got travel confidence is a link on the website. And they're trying to tell travelers, before you come to the airport, here's what's going on. Here's why you should feel comfortable. And the planes are doing a lot. The airlines are doing a lot of that misting inside the airplanes now. They have new chemicals they're coming up with that are good for 24 hours for sterilization. So I think this time is allowing everyone to get better at what they're doing. It's sterilizing and sanitizing and all that. So I think it's a positive thing.
Thank you.
Any follow-on, Member Foster? Anyone else?
No.
Mr. Chair, this is Becky.
Mayor Mary, were you trying to say something?
can you hear me?
Yeah, member.
Mr. Chair, I don't, when you were speaking, it was starting to cut out, and I just want to just check if it's ours. I'm actually at the municipal center, so our bandwidth should be good. But also, I don't know who was speaking just now. Deb Barber.
It was
Deb, I couldn't hear you.
Becky.
Becky.
It's Becky.
Becky. Becky, and I do apologize. I'm on the road. I wanted to say aye and present for the initial roll call vote, but I did have a question. Have they traced any actual COVID cases to any specific flights at this point?
We're not researching that. We're not looking into that. We haven't heard of anything. I mean, we don't test the people. We've stopped testing people coming into the airport, coming off the planes. So I don't know. I don't know if I could get that number. I can ask MAC staff if they have any numbers and relay them to you in the future.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I do apologize for my technical difficulties. I'll go
Yeah.
back on mute. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for Member Crimmins? All right, thank you. And then on to Deb Barber at the Met Council, and some, I'm sure everybody's seen it in the paper, but some great news to report there to start out part of her reporting. So, Member Barber.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we are very excited to announce that after much anticipation and many years of hard work, the full funding grant agreement was signed on Monday. The full funding grant agreement brings nearly $1 billion in federal funds, allowing us to complete Minnesota's largest ever public work project, Southwest LRT. We're very, very excited. It's been a long road. The list of people to thank is so extensively long that I'm going to try and do it in some broad sweeps. But certainly the current administration and prior administrations, the current council, prior councils, definitely Hennepin County, all of the cities along the corridor, all of the advocates that are represented here. It just really, really shows that to get something big done, we all have to work together, and that's the only way that this happens. So it was a very, very exciting day for the region, a very, very exciting day for the state. So we're very happy to have that piece of the project moving along. As y'all know, we're well under construction, and now we'll be able to continue that construction. So we're still looking forward to the planned opening in 2023. So super excited. But thank you really, really to all of you and to all of our project partners. Also, thank you to our project office, the Southwest LRT project office, who did exceptional work and has all along, but really, really helped carry this over the finish line. So very good news. We like to start with good news. So we have some more good news, actually. So a couple of other things I wanted to report on. So with the impact of COVID, the council has taken that opportunity to repurpose some of our transit service to provide critical food delivery services from food shelves and food banks. We talked a little bit about this earlier in the pandemic, but we've kind of continued and expanded some of this. This service is being provided through our contractors who operate the Transit Link Dial-A-Ride service. There are hundreds of daily food deliveries happening throughout the 7 county areas Monday through Friday to allow the customers, many who are vulnerable to COVID, to safely receive essential food needs and to support food shelves who often do not have the infrastructure to deliver food to residences. I would say it also has a dual opportunity as some of our transit link service is down, so it also provides operators to continue working and to also provide a much needed service to the community. Also, a big thing that happened in the last few days, on September 12th, Metro Transit implemented its new service level, and it returns the service level to 80% from levels from a level that was at about 60% of normal levels that we had been operating over the last few months. The 80% level is an average. We did prioritize certain routes. So local core routes returned to about 100 return to 100% to deal with both the demand and also the need to maintain social distancing protocols. Express routes and commuter rail will operate at levels that are much lower because there has not been an increase in demand for this service yet. So Metro Mobility currently is offering about 40% level for ridership, but they are also continuing to provide service for essential healthcare workers and some food delivery service that puts its operations at about 80% or pre-COVID levels. But with that, I'd pause to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Member Barber, questions or comments by any of our colleagues or Ms. Barber? All right, good. Looks like we're finally going to have a system.
I see Amity had her hand up. I'm sorry.
Oh, all right. Was it Commissioner McGuire?
No, it was Foster.
Okay. Member Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Member Barber. I would just really like to say congratulations on the funding coming in for Southwest Light Rail. Testifying about that was one of my first public testimonies, and so to see it like fully be able to be completed is just wonderful, and I really want us all to celebrate that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you very much.
And well done to everybody on the call who did work on it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Member Foster. Commissioner McGuire.
And there we go. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm just so excited about the Southwest, but I'm also excited about you repurposing some of your lines and transportation vehicles to help serve our public. Are you working with counties on that, or could you just talk a little bit about who you're working with to provide those meals, and is it with nonprofits, or how are you figuring out who to serve with those extra services?
Thank you for thanks for the question. I'm actually going to have Nick step in because he's really taking the lead on a lot of this. So if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, thank you, members. So what we've done is we started with the counties. The counties have maintained pretty good lists of food banks and food shelves within their county boundaries. And then we made individual contact to each of the food bank providers with the contacts the counties provided, and set up kind of routes with them or anything to meet their needs. Not all food banks had a need, but it's been growing. We've been able to use some of our federal CARES funds to cover this service. And then we're coordinating with a statewide effort on food security that is really making sure that we understand the food flows, that there's a lot of different entities involved in fulfilling the food needs and getting food to the food shelves so that we can change our demand as needed. But the county played a very key role, because I think that's a whole different game than we were used to dealing with. And we relied on the county expertise to help us kind of figure out the system and know who to work with, because it was very new to us. But we really appreciate the county support.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I appreciate that, and I do. I know that we've appreciate that partnership and just that work and thinking of what needs to get done and then getting it done. So thank you so much for that.
Welcome.
And I would just say, both to MTS and Metro Transit, I've been so happy of how we've responded and some of the actions we've been able to take to work with the communities, whether it's looking at the transportation of essential workers or the delivery of food, also to things like looking at where we're focusing, bringing our service back so that we know that we're servicing the communities that really need it. So people have really taken time to take a broader look at everything to make sure we're meeting the needs of the region.
All right, thank you. Member Foster is causing me to think back. I was on that corridor management committee for Southwest LRT. And I think the first meeting I went to, Peter Bell was still the chair. And so it's been a long haul with a lot of really tricky issues, both politically and legally. And I think I've got a lifetime visa into St. Louis Park for voting to keep freight in the Kenilworth corridor. So but without a dog in the fight, it was easier to analyze that issue when you didn't have a stake in the outcome as to whether freight ought to be rerouted through St. Louis Park or stay in the corridor. But it's really going to be a wonderful thing for our region to now have a system of light rail with the additional almost 16 miles of route here on Southwest LRT being added to what we have now. We're really going to be able to claim some significant light rail system in our region. Anyone else? Commissioner Karwoski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd like to congratulate the Southwest LRT. Being a Washington County Commissioner, we hope in 2 years to have our GO line bus rapid transit. So what's exciting about that is in 2 years, you'll be able to go from the East Metro, like a city of Woodbury or Oakdale, all the way out to Eden Prairie, Gold Line to, I believe, Green Line, and then jump on the LRT to the Southwest. So it's pretty exciting to get across our region with transit here. And we're only a couple short years away, so we're looking forward to the support of the Gold Line here upcoming.
Yeah, agreed.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Any other reports?
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
Matt Hollinshead.
Yes, Member Hollinshead.
I just want to say I did also serve on the Citizens Advisory Committee for Southwest in the last phase of the planning. And it was interesting because I was an at-large member, but from the East Metro. And I just want to sort of piggyback on what Commissioner Karlowski just said. This may be in the West Metro, it may be in the Southwest quadrant of the Metro, but it is important for the entire Metro. And I specifically wanted to be involved because getting to the job centers in Eden Prairie and surrounding communities from St. Paul has been a real hassle. And I think this will create a lot of opportunities for people who need jobs, who need work in the city in which I live, St. Paul, even though the line is in the Southwest Metro. So I congratulate everybody and the Met Council and Hennepin County and all the planners. And let's get it done and open. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Hollinshead. Mayor Mary.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and congratulations. This is quite a feat for this region to accomplish. And one of the great things is hopefully by 2023, we will actually be able to join together, come together to celebrate. And maybe we won't even have to wear masks. That would be really great. So thank you.
That would be good. I'm just thinking, I was looking at Matt Look's name there and thinking about all the meetings we went to in St. Louis Park as we worked on this Southwest LRT. So it's nice to have it wrapped up here and part of a system. So,
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm raising my hand, but maybe you can't see me.
Mr. Gattel.
There's been a lot of work on this, Jim. You and I have been on this for a very long time. I remember looking at this too as a mayor and on all the work that we put through. But, through the county has really stepped up too. And we had CTIB dollars, and those CTIB dollars of all the counties went into Southwest Light Rail. So I can thank all the counties, not just Hennepin County. Although Peter McLaughlin really, when this thing was going to die a couple of things, he kept this going. And, so this was proof that we can do this. And I think about the BRTs that's going to go out to Stan's area or the expansion we might do in Apple Valley and all this. It's because we have a vision and we don't let it go. I think my biggest next thing is Botno, the line what we call to disparities, to fill that, and St. Paul. That really connects the city and the issues around some of the people to some of the best jobs in the metro area. When we get those two lines done, we will have done quite a bit. And seeing this happen makes me feel like that's still all the bumps we're going through right now with both those things makes me feel like this is real and it's going to happen. So I'm looking forward to the future for all of us. So thanks everyone who helped, participated. And like I said, all your counties helped and put dollars into making this real. And we continue to put dollars into making these projects real. So thank you.
That's a great observation, Commissioner. Thank you. Yeah, to recognize all the county effort as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then Member Hollins had also caused me to think about it. I think this is the first line where we'll have a pretty equal distribution of passenger traffic in both directions, taking people now up to those jobs in the Golden Triangle and beyond is an important part of this whole process. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. All right. Let's see. We've got minutes. Does anybody have anything they want to modify in terms of the minutes? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Move approval, Mr. Chair.
All right, Mayor Mary moves approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by
Anderson.
and Member Anderson. And any further discussion? Roll call, please, with respect to approval of the minutes.
And before I do the roll call, just to clarify, Member Lindeke was present and approved the amended agenda. I will now do the roll call.
He's going to make that observation too, that Member Lindeke was here. So.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey. Barber.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
Boyles.
I presume I abstained since I wasn't present.
Oh, now we're doing the minutes.
Right, I wasn't at that meeting.
Right, but just for the approval of them.
Okay, aye.
Crimmins.
Aye.
Dugan. Foster.
Aye.
Fox. Fox.
Aye.
Geisler.
Geisler, aye.
Giuliani Stevens.
Aye.
Gattell.
Aye.
Heyman Roland.
Aye.
Hanson.
Aye.
Holberg.
Aye.
Hollinshead.
Aye.
Karwoski.
Aye.
Lindeke.
Aye.
Look.
Aye.
Malichnik.
Aye.
Buin.
Aye.
McGuire. Narayanan. Petrick.
Petrick, aye.
Oh, Petrick, sorry.
No,
Drake.
no.
Aye.
Sanger.
Aye.
Schember.
Aye.
Stephenson.
Aye.
Swanson. Tolbert.
Yes.
Ulrich.
Aye.
Windshuttle.
Yes.
Washi.
Aye.
Mayor's here. Yep. All right. Good. Thank you, Jenna. The minutes of the regular meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board for Wednesday, August 19th, 2020 are approved. We're going to move on now to the business portion of the agenda. We've got some consent agenda items. We've got 3 of those. Is there anyone on the tab that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Otherwise, we'll take a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda in a single motion.
So moved.
Is that Member Boyles?
Correct.
All right. Is there a second?
Second, McGuire, second.
McGuire, Commissioner McGuire. All right. Any discussion? Roll call, please, Jenna, with respect to the consent agenda items.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey. Barber.
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Boyles,
Aye.
Crimmins,
Aye.
Dugan, Foster,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Geisler,
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens,
Aye.
Patel,
Aye.
Heyman Roland,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Holberg,
Aye.
Hollinshead,
Aye.
Karwoski,
Aye.
Lindeke,
Aye.
Look,
Aye.
Malichnik,
Aye.
Bewan,
Aye.
McGuire,
Aye.
Naryanan,
Aye.
Keetrick,
Aye.
Reich,
Aye.
Sanger,
Aye.
Schember,
Aye.
Stephenson,
Aye.
Swanson, Tolbert,
Yes. Yes.
Ulrich,
Aye.
Windshuttle,
Yes.
Washi.
Aye.
Good. The consent agenda items are approved. And next to the non-consent agenda items, we have two matters in that portion of the agenda. The first is a recommended adoption of the 2021 Unified Planning Work Program. We've got a presentation on that. Lisa Fries, our TAC chair, is with us, as well as I think some staff folks from the council. And Chair Fries.
It's my understanding that we are just going to do a little update here for you today, and we're not going to do a full-blown presentation, but David Burns is here from the council staff if there are detailed questions about the content of the work program.
Okay.
As you know, each year we update and adopt a unified planning work program, and it serves as the council's application to the US DOT for the federal transportation planning funds. The participants in the unified work plan or unified planning work program, the UPWP, include the Met Council along with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and the Metropolitan Airports Commission. The UPWP includes activities required under federal regulation, expressing planning priorities in the metropolitan planning area. So it also documents budget expenditures and the allocation of staff resources for these activities. There's an estimated $4.5 million in federal planning money that will be spent with items that are identified in this year's program, along with a 20% required local match. Additionally, in 2021, there will be an overmatch of approximately 25% in order to support all of the work program activities identified in the plan. The plan, the tasks are required by state or federal law and are oftentimes ongoing, such as the preparation of the annual transportation improvement program and the biannual regional solicitation. The planning does go through a review process that starts out with TAC planning, and TAC planning initially reviewed this at their August meeting, August 13th, and recommended approval to the TAC. One of the items that's new in this work program and not previously studied includes a regional travel demand management study, which will look at the rates and encourage reduction in the use of single occupancy vehicles. This study has a price tag of $20,000, and the funds that will be used to support this study are being shifted from another activity, the Regional Network Enhancement Multimodal Network Design Projects. Throughout the course of the review of this, there have been some feedback from both MPCA and MnDOT, and those changes were more housekeeping in nature and have been incorporated into the document that is before you today. The Transportation Advisory Committee, Technical Committee reviewed this on September 2nd at their regular meeting and recommended approval of it. With that, as I mentioned, David is in the audience here today and we'll take any questions on any specific items you might have.
All right. Are there questions by tab members for either Chair Freeze or David Burns with regard to this application to the US DOT for transportation planning funds? All right. Is there a motion to approve action transmittal 2020-29? The recommended motion being that the tab requests the Met Council to approve the adoption of the 2021 Unified Planning Work Program.
Mr. Chair, I will make that motion.
Windshuttle seconds.
Windshuttle seconds. Mayor Windshuttle, Mayor Mary is the maker. Further discussion by tab members? All right. Jenna, roll call, please.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey. Barber.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
Boyles.
Aye.
Crimmins.
Aye.
Dugan. Foster. Foster.
Aye.
Fox.
Aye.
Geisler.
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens.
Aye.
Gattell.
Aye.
Heyman Roland.
Aye.
Hanson.
Aye.
Holberg.
Aye.
Hollinshead.
Aye.
Karwoski.
Aye.
Lindeke.
Aye.
Look.
Aye.
Molichnik.
Aye.
Bewan.
Aye.
McGuire. McGuire.
There also is a provision included in the proposal.
Aye.
Petrick.
Aye.
Reich.
Aye.
Sanger.
Aye.
Schumberg.
Aye.
Stephenson. Stephenson.
Aye.
Swanson. Tolbert.
Yes.
Ulrich.
Aye.
Winchell.
Yes.
Washi.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. The action item 2020-29, recommending adoption of the 2021 Unified Planning Work Program is approved. We'll pass it on to the Met Council. Next action item Chair Freeze has as well, which is dealing with the regional solicitation, and Chair Freeze.
Thank you. As you'll recall, when we were in the process of developing the 2020 regional solicitation, a new funding area was created to allow for a single arterial bus rapid transit project to receive up to 25 million in funding without needing to submit a formal application for funding. Previously, you'll recall that for ABRT funding to occur, they needed to apply under the transit categories of expansion, and typically they were awarded 7 million at a time, which was a rather inefficient way to fund these projects, which required a little bit more or a larger pot of money to get off the ground in a significant way. In the selection process for the arterial bus rapid project category, the documentation says that the arterial bus rapid transit project will not be evaluated with a scored application. TAB will select the Arterial BRT project concurrent with the other regional solicitation project selections. Background information on the potential Arterial BRT line and the prioritization through the Network Next process will be provided by Metro Transit, along with other funding recommendations for the TAB decision making. Since that time, especially with COVID-19 and then the recent civil unrest following George Floyd's murder, there has been an increase in expectations for the community engagement, the desire to have it be more authentic and robust, and especially during this time of COVID, that's been a challenge to get launched and do in a sufficient way. So at this point, the selection process for the F line is needing a little bit more time in the fall of this year and into early 2021 to get through that process. So when we will be selecting the other projects in December, that F line prioritization will not be completed. So what this action is asking you to do to allow for a timeline extension for the project selection of the F line in the Arterial Bus Rapid Transit project funding category from December 2020 through April 2021, and to include $25 million for the F line Arterial Bus Rapid Transit project in the 2020 regional solicitation. This was brought before the TAC Funding and Programming Committee. Wait, I should step back. It's gone through a couple of processes here. It went through the regional solicitation policymaker work group, and they met on August 6th and were supportive of this proposed action, including that the information be brought forward by Metro Transit on the network next schedule adjustments. And then it went through the formal process of going first to TAC Funding and Programming at their August 20th meeting. And then TAC also recommended approval at their September meeting. So with that, I believe Charles is in the audience if you have specific questions about the Network Next process. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right. Does anybody have any questions for Chair Freeze? This is an issue that we've talked about actually for the last few months. Member Boyles.
Yes.
Does this create an unfair or unequal playing field for various vendors? You hear me?
Mm-hmm.
It may be a staff-directed question. Chair Freeze. Did you hear the question?
I did. I don't know that I'm the right person necessarily to respond to that question.
Maybe Nick or Amy could respond, or Charles.
So, Mr. Chair, this is Nick Thompson. That was a good question. When we had this discussion with the policymaker group and TAB last year, is setting up the regional solicitation. Metro Transit, who's the largest transit provider, had been applying for ABRT each year and being successful. They were always the top ranked project in the categories. And as the main provider of Arterial Bus Rapid Transit, all the top lines that have been identified so far are in the Metro Transit category or service area. It was decided that they would let Metro, because Metro Transit had been getting these Arterial BRT funding through the regional solicitation and would continue to apply for them, that there was no conflict with the other providers. Now, the solicitation itself does include other BRT investments, allowing up to $7 million for BRT projects. And in this cycle, we had applications from counties and cities for BRT projects. So there's another avenue for BRT projects to also receive funding from the regional solicitation beyond Metro Transit. If that answers your question. I see Councilmember Barber has a question.
Yes, Mr. Chair. No, I don't think it creates an unfair advantage for any particular project. This was sort of the philosophy that we move forward with for this regional solicitation cycle, and that had been agreed to by TAB. And all we're asking is, because part of how we do the right way of selecting particular ABRT lines and doing all of that is it does take a significant amount of public outreach. And given what where we're at with COVID right now, we need the extra time to do that. The intention is still, of course, to bring it back here to TAB for a final decision, but I don't think it changes the philosophy of how we approached this regional solicitation cycle. It just means that we want to be very intentional and thoughtful about how we engage the public to make sure we're putting forward the right line.
All right, Commissioner Milishnik.
Mr. Chair, if it's appropriate, I just move approval of this item.
No.
Yeah, well, you can make the motion and then we can have discussion. We got a motion by Commissioner Milishnik
second.
to approve action 2020-32. Is there a second?
Second by Barber.
All right, second by Member Barber. Now we're in discussion, back in discussion. We've got two recommended actions here as part of a singular motion. One is to allow a timeline extension of the project selection for F-line and the Arterial Bus Rapid Transit project funding category from December 2020 to April 2021. And then the direction to staff to include the $25 million for the F-line Arterial Bus Rapid Transit project and all 2020 regional solicitation funding options brought forward for TAB consideration. When we talked about this before, and I think Nick Thompson touched on it, as did Member Barber, we actually thought, and when Charles made the presentation, you recall, it actually gives us a chance to get more community-based input on the front end, whether instead of partway through the process. So I think as it turned out, we're in this pandemic, but it probably helps with creating a more effective public process. So I don't think we're seeing a disadvantage to fellow competitors. The money was approved. We're just getting the extensions needed to be able to get the right kind of public input. So we've got a motion and a second. Any other questions, discussion, comments?
Mayor Hovland?
Yes. Member Sanger?
Yes. I am fine with this motion for this particular BRT selection, but I'm not clear whether the intent is to use this process for other BRT lines going forward in the future. And I would have some concerns about doing it again in the future based on, of course, the need for having more public engagement. I would rather have going forward, when we have more time available, to get some public engagement before the choice is made. So if you could clarify whether this is a one-off decision.
Member Barber, do you want to? Yeah, I think it is. It's unusual circumstance, but I think it's to the advantage of the public, not the disadvantage. Right. Member Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think so. Every regional solicitation cycle, we revisit how we approach the regional solicitation. I would say the work group that was looking at this initially and then brought it back to TAB really felt the desire to start looking at regionally impactful projects and how to tackle some of those. For this cycle, it's an ABRT. That could change as we go forward. As we know, we've been talking about other BRT routes, other things like that. We don't know what the framework, that's part of, I think, part of our later discussion here of how do we, the next steps in looking at the next round and positioning the next round for the regional solicitation. But it was, I think, and if anyone from the work group has any other thoughts, but I think that there was a real intentional desire to see us put money towards one big project. And I think we see that happening in a lot of our cohort regions, and it's been able to sort of advance things very quickly where we can start to connect different routes. So it's very similar to how Commissioner Korosky talked about being able to connect from east to west. You know, some of these in making some of these big investments makes some of those impacts happen faster, and we can really sort of see the build out of the system where it becomes a truly connected system.
Mr. Carlson, did you have any comment? I know Elaine wants to make a comment, so we can have either Elaine or Charles Carlson go next. Oh, Elaine, go ahead. Elaine, you're on mute.
You think I would know by now how to do this. I wanted to respond to the last question. When we redo the regional solicitation, it will go out for public comment again. So every time we do this, the public has a chance to comment on the changes that are made, whether to continue this or not.
All right. Mr. Carlson, do you have any comment with regard to the process that you talked to us about here in terms of requesting the extension?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. Just wanted to thank the TAB for good discussion at its last meeting where this was pretty warmly received. We've brought this through the technical process. Last month, there was a lot of interest in how TAB members could support this engagement effort. And earlier this afternoon, we emailed out through Elaine, and thank you, Elaine, a number of different ways that members could support this work. This first phase of engagement extends through October 9th. So lots of resources in there on ways to pass that along or participate directly. And then the next phase will progress where next time you'll see this project will be an update on the top tiers in the December timeframe when you're making project selection. We'd see the top corridors that would then get much more community engagement early in 2021 before selection. So just want to thank the TAB and thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Member Geisler.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I just want to comment that we made this move to try to have a really deep impact so that citizens felt that they were getting a bang for their buck. And I think delaying to make sure that we're making the right investment for as big of an investment as this is in the right place will only benefit the citizens. It really is a smart move to make sure we're picking the right investment. I don't feel like anybody here is going to say, well, we're delaying just because we're delaying. There's a lot of things that have just, no pun intended, put things off the rails and have made it a lot more difficult to just have our regular processes. So I'm all for taking a little more time to make this right decision. I agree with the other comments that, you know, next cycle we should make sure we try to keep things as tight and in the same path as possible. But this makes a whole lot of sense for the kind of investment that we're looking at.
Thank you, Member Geisler. Member Schember, did you have your hand up?
I think we've clarified that, but I just want to, for complete clarity, we're voting here on this proposal to address this cycle only, not future cycles, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
That was my question.
Commissioner Look.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. I don't mean to make light of this, but can I ask how we came up with the name?
For the F line, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I think it was that alphabetical progression, but you raised an interesting question.
So, Mr. Chair, I can briefly address that. We've implemented the A line and the C line. The D line is ready to go out for bid, pending the full funding that could occur through a bonding bill. We've named the B line and the E line as next corridors that are in planning, and that means the next one to go would be the F line, and that's the location we need to identify through this process.
Mr. Chair, I don't mean to be difficult, but I just see a fair amount of criticism possibly being generated as a result of that. And I don't know if it's akin to not putting in a 13th floor and an elevator, but it's, I don't know. I just see, you know, I think we can all be mature about it, but I'm sure there'll be significant, you know, criticism on the outside to exacerbate the name a little bit, but my opinion.
Mr. Chair, we don't anticipate doing an I line or an O line because they look like a 1 or a 0, but certainly if we hear hear concerns about use of the letter F. Skipping other ones has certainly been considered before, and if we can keep our ear to that as the planning continues.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'm still trying to understand some of these things, but what happens if this gets delayed for some, who knows with what's happening in the world? What happens if it's delayed again? Does it have to come back? Do we lose funding? What would happen if it for some reason got delayed again?
Somebody wish to comment on this? I think it's just a public input issue now. And I don't anticipate any basis for delay. I think we've got that pretty well thought through. I don't know whether Mr. Carlson or Member Barber would want to comment.
I can make a quick comment, then Charles can add on if he needs to. I think that the key things that we did with this is that originally the prioritization of the ABRT lines was coupled together with the Network Next effort. We've decoupled those so that we can focus on the ABRT prioritization, because Network Next is really Metro Transit's service improvement plan. So every transit agency, whether it's the suburban transit providers or us, do a service improvement plan, and it just made sense to separate those two. And I think that action, pushing that further out, because we don't know how travel behavior is going to be impacted, and I don't know that we'd have some of those answers by next year. And so by separating those two, I'm very confident that we will stay on track to come back to TAB with a selection. We'll know a lot more in December when we see what the top tiers are, the top options, but that really allows us to really focus our engagement efforts on the ABRTs when we push out the rest of the service planning a little further.
Thank you. All right. Did that help, Mayor?
Yeah, I'm good with that. Thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Chair.
All right. Anyone else? So we've got a motion in front of us that has two parts to it. It's action transmittal 2020-32. We got a motion and a second. And again, the recommended action is to allow a timeline extension of the project selection for F-line in the Arterial Bus Rapid Transit Project funding category from December 2020 to April 2021, then directing staff to include $25 million for the F-line Arterial Bus Rapid Transit Project to be selected in all 2020 regional solicitation funding options brought forward for TAB consideration. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Jenna.
Anderson.
Aye.
Bailey. Barber.
Aye. And I think I saw Bailey on.
Yep. Mayor Bailey is now on.
Oh, Bailey?
At least he was.
Okay, Member Bailey, if you want to put your vote in the chat. Barnes?
Aye.
Boyles?
Aye.
Crimmins?
Aye.
Dugan?
Aye.
Foster?
Aye.
Fox?
Aye.
Geisler?
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens?
Aye.
Gattell?
Aye.
Cayman Rowland?
Aye.
Hanson?
Aye.
Holberg?
Aye.
Hollinshead?
Aye.
Karwoski?
Aye.
Lindeke?
Aye.
Look?
Aye.
Malichnik?
Aye.
Ewan? Oh, I think he said he had to go. McGuire?
Aye.
Narayanan?
Aye.
Petrick? Reich?
Aye.
Sanger?
Aye.
Schumber?
Aye.
Stephenson?
Aye.
Swanson? Tolbert?
Yes.
Ulrich,
Aye.
Windshuttle,
Yes.
Washi.
Aye.
The recommended two-part motion and action transmittal 2020-32 is approved. All right, that completes our work on the non-consent agenda items on the tab agenda, and we're going to move into the informational portion of the agenda. And first, we've got the TPP public comments, and we got Amy Venowitz and Sarah Maskey here from Communications to walk us through those public comments.
Yes, Mr. Chair and members.
Whoa.
Sarah Maskey's going to start out here. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you are really, Amy, you are really kind of echoey.
Hello?
Mr. Chair, I would just note, Amy and I think I have the same computer. The video is creating substantial issues. I think it might be helpful for people to turn off their video.
All right. Is that better?
Seems to be so far.
Okay. All right. I think Sarah is online and she's going to start off with the first few slides here talking about our engagement process, and then she'll turn it over to me to talk about our proposed responses. So Sarah, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is the timeline for the TPP public comment period. As you can see, we are in the September 14th to October 9th review of the comments and revising the TPP in response to those comments. So we're here today to fill you in on what has been happening. And next slide, please. So just to start off, our outreach and engagement audiences for the Transportation Policy Plan included our formal council partners, including TAB, yourselves, TACT, TAAC, and other council committees. There were organizations.
I gotta make an appointment. Oops.
There are other organizations that we engaged, including business, advocacy, cultural groups, workforce groups, education organizations, and neighborhood groups. Cities, counties, and townships throughout the Twin Cities region, advocacy groups, and residents of the region. Next slide, please. So we provided information, education, promotion, and engagement with our formal and informal partners. We provided translated communications that allow those who don't speak or read English the opportunity to comment. And as themes have emerged, we're reporting out like we're doing today. We can also provide a presentation on the feedback as requested by outside groups or within the council as we go through the formal review channels. Next slide, please. We use the council's website, newsletter, social media, and email distribution channels to provide information about the TPP and how we can receive people's feedback. Outreach to key constituencies, leverage social medias to elicit responses to some of the pressing issues around transportation in the region. And I'll show you some examples in just a minute here. And as required, we place a classified ad in the Star Tribune. We hosted an online public hearing in association with a Transportation Committee meeting on July 27th. We had 30 people registered and one actually spoke, which was terrific. And the outcomes, so much of the input into the TPP happens over time through studies. For example, like the recently completed freeway interchange study and the in-process regional transit service allocation study. All of that input changes and influences the plan when minor updates happen. We want to be sure that key constituencies have one more opportunity to provide feedback and guidance on the publication of the TPP update. The process engages a cross-section of the region's residents, including residents from all parts of the region and from a range of demographic characteristics. The council's partners, stakeholders, and constituents have the opportunity to engage with the process through appropriate and authentic engagement. And the council grows its capacity to interact with communities, stakeholders, and constituencies. Next slide, please.
So these are just a few of the examples that we used on social. We were asking specifically about when the city has closed down some streets to open it up for biking and walking. We wanted to get people's reaction on that. Also, the implementation of electronic vehicles as we're doing in electric vehicles, as we're doing an electric vehicle study is as part of the next TPP. Also, in response to COVID, many people are teleworking, as we all are right now, and wanted to get people's response to that. And some of the other questions we asked included public transportation and how it's changed during the outbreak, and what are you personally or your county, city, or township doing to reduce greenhouse gases from transportation sources. So we were trying to get at some of those really core issues. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn this over now to Amy Venowitz to complete up the presentation.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Mr. Chair and members, how's my sound before I get going here?
It's pretty good. It's not quite as good as Sarah's, but it's just a hint of echo chamber. But I think it's
all right. If it gets too irritating, stop me and we'll see if we can maybe do something different here. So I am going to go through the comments that we received during the public comment process, and then our proposed responses and changes that we're proposing to the TPP update. So the real purpose of this info item is to get feedback from the tab, you, on whether you agree with our responses, if you think there is something additional that we should add to the response, and specifically if you have additional suggestions for changes that we should be making to the TPP update. So this, despite being online for this public comment process, we did receive quite a bit of public comment. We had 215 people and organizations that provided comments, and that resulted in over 420 specific comments on the TPP update. We take those comments, we read them all, we summarize them, and we try to put them into similar topics and buckets so that they're easier to respond to. And we have done that in the public comment report, which is also attached to the agenda for this meeting in case you want to look through the actual specific comments. I am just going to go through the highlights of the comments in the presentation today, but if you have looked through it and have specific questions about any of our responses, I would be happy to address that too. So generally, we received 3 comments that are all somewhat interrelated and have the same theme. I would note that the bulk of these comments came through Sierra Club members who apparently sent out a request to their members to respond and provide comment on the TPP, and I believe we received over 100 comments from the Sierra Club members. But I also don't want to discount those comments and act as if they're all the same, because it is 100 people who took the time to respond, provide us with comments, and most of the comments that were submitted, the individual took the time to kind of put their own personal flair on the comment. They added additional commentary, they added additional comments, and so while they're all in the same bucket, it really is quite a number of individuals who submitted these comments. So having said that, they did kind of boil down to 3 key themes. The first is that basically a request that we eliminate road expansion and that we invest in transit and active transportation, primarily for the purpose of mitigating climate change, and also which would have the impact of lowering vehicle miles traveled, which would also thereby have another impact on climate change impacts. The second major comment, which is interrelated to the first, is that our region's Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and the low-income communities are those who are most impacted by climate change, and that our plan should plan and invest to mitigate the impacts, specifically the transportation impacts on those communities, and to reduce inequities. And then the third comment, again, is somewhat related with the climate change theme, and that was that we should use the TPP to promote best practices in parking and parking policies to influence how local communities implement parking, and that this in turn will help to mitigate travel and climate change, and also environmental impacts such as flooding and land use that are negative to the environment. So those are the three kind of major comments that we received. We did receive additional comments that had more than one commenter, also shown on this slide. The first is safety and security, comments about safety and security on transit and improvements we can make to safety and security. There were a number of comments about transitway investments. Specifically, there was support for arterial BRT investments, support for investments in other corridors, and then there was general support for investments in bicycle and pedestrian projects. There were a few comments indicating a lack of support for light rail transit investment. And then the final kind of general comment that we're pulling out here is support for bus fleet electrification, but also we received a couple comments that supported general regional fleet, even private vehicle electrification. And so I'm going to go through the three major comments in a little bit of detail on our response and changes we're proposing to the TPP. So next slide, please, Greg. So the eliminate road expansion comment, it seemed to us that there was a little bit of an assumption embedded into this comment that if we could eliminate the spending on road expansion, that we would be able to shift that spending away from roads into transit and other modes and other types of active transportation spending. So part of our response on this comment is a reminder that much of the funding directed within the TPP, while it can be shifted within a mode, we do not always have a lot of control to shift it from one mode to another. And a good example of this would be shifting spending on MnDOT's trunk highway system into spending on transit or bike and ped. And so the TPP, due to state laws and constitutional dedications, we do not have the capability to actually shift funding. We do have the capability to shift it within the mode. And so I wanted to note that. And so part of our response is that the TPP does note that the majority of transportation funds are dedicated under state and federal law. We don't have the flexibility to move these funds between modes. We do point out that the regional solicitation does offer the opportunity to do some shifting among modes, and that funding is controlled by TAB and the council. Historically, it has been allocated 55% to roads, 30% to transit, 15% to bike and ped. But we also note that many of the roadway projects that are funded through the solicitation also contain significant multimodal spending in trails and sidewalks and transit advantages. One thing I wanted to note here, when I quote the 3% of total spending is regional solicitation spending, that is of total transportation spending within the region, including all local government spending. If you look at just federal funded projects as we do through the TIP, the regional solicitation would account for about 15% of the spending.
Ms. Venowitz, before you leave slide 9, Member Lindeke has a question for you.
Sure.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, my question is just about the relationship between expansion and maintenance. So when I have talked to people about this particular issue in the past, in relationship to the city of St. Paul, it's an issue that the way I frame this is about just the astronomical expense of a lot of infrastructure that we built already that's reaching its current design sort of lifespan. And there's a bridge downtown that is an example where I hear what it costs to replace this already existing bridge, and it's a huge number. So I think that's what I was curious about with this particular comment that we received a lot, which is of the road funding that we're doing, how much is expanding our current system and making, stuff that's going to cost more when it needs to be replaced in 40 years or 50 years versus maintaining what we have already built in the system today. So if you could tell me a little bit about that relationship, what those costs are, that would be great.
Yeah, we do go into this in the TPP in some detail, but by far the bulk of the roadway spending is on what we call preservation, maintenance, and operations. I think for the MnDOT spending specifically, only about 10% of it is going to what we would call mobility projects, and mobility is not always necessarily total expansion or a new lane. And a mobility project might be a short auxiliary lane, it might be a spot mobility improvement, it might be spending in the form of technology to help us manage congestion. So generally, of the roadway spending, I would say about 10% of it is expansion funding.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that comment.
Good. Any follow-on, Member Lindeke?
Sanger, may I comment?
Yes, Member Sanger.
Yes, I agree with kind of the impetus behind that last comment. I actually agree with the idea that we should be eliminating the road expansion category. But I also realize we can't switch the money to different modes, but I think that our response ought to specifically call out that the road expansion money could be shifted to other types of roadway projects, and so that that flexibility exists, and we should acknowledge that here.
Mr. Chair and members, I agree, and I don't want to overcomplicate this, but to some degree, particularly on the MnDOT system, if we chose not to invest in mobility projects, the spending could go to preservation, but it also could go to mobility projects in greater Minnesota. So again, the Met Council and the TAB would not have control over how much funding we get for those specific purposes. MnDOT has control over how much funding they give us for the trunk highway roadway purposes, and they do give us the funding in specific categories of preservation, bridges, mobility funding.
All right, a member Narayanan has a comment or a question as well. Member Narayanan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to kind of also talk about some of the, the structural issues that have been identified in these comments, and do want to point out that just simply saying that a lot of this money has been specifically restricted does not necessarily address the problems that have been identified in the comments, especially the ones, relating to roadway expansion and things like climate change. Just yesterday, our skies were clouded over by the fires on the West Coast, which were a result of climate change. And so from a TAB perspective, I would really like maybe Met Council to tell us, where some of these barriers lie to us being able to change some of those structures of how money is being spent. I think there's even a lot of latitude in for example, can we spend money on a MnDOT-owned if we spend money on a transit project on a MnDOT-owned highway, is that something that we can do, for example? And then my second point is about kind of authentic engagement. I think you did a great job in getting a lot of people to comment on this, but maybe being clearer about what exactly their comments can and cannot do, I think would go further towards helping build more community trust and more getting more authentic engagement. So just in summary, I think, maybe a more comprehensive response here around what some of the issues are and helping TAB members understand what we can do to maybe liaise with the legislature or any other agency or entity would be really helpful, I think.
Thank you, Member Narayanan, and we can address that momentarily. Member Geisler has a comment as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to remind some of the folks here too that, we represent 7 counties is what we're looking at, and half of my district as a citizen rep is urban, and expansion may not be the right choice. The other half of my district is developing, growing, and brand new. And so I think we need to make sure we're understanding what expansion really means, because there are some places that may only be a 2-lane byway that should be expanded to a 4-lane because there's all of a sudden now 20, 30,000 people who live further out that we're needed connecting to. And so while I'm absolutely an advocate for a lot of things that are here, I think we need to remember that there is a balance to be struck between wholesale saying expansion should be eliminated because we have new communities coming up further outside of the metro core that we still need to continue to service.
All right, thank you, Member Geisler. Other comments on this particular slide? Member or Ms. Venowitz, so is what we see in blue with the 4 bullet points, is that proposed to be the answer to this general sort of concern about roadway expansion?
Mr. Chair, this is kind of laying out our response. I'm going to ask Greg to move forward to slide 11 and just kind of get to the point here. There we go. So the first couple slides were just kind of laying out a response in general. The changes that we are specifically recommending to the TPP update are to add additional text in the overview, recognizing and emphasizing that much of regional transportation spending is inflexible, or maybe even a better way to put that is it comes to us for specific purposes that we can't necessarily change. Also, we are proposing to clarify in both the overview and the highway chapter that the first focus before we ever move to looking at roadway solutions or investments is to look at whether travel demand management and land use solutions can have an impact on the problems that we're experiencing. We are also adding a regional TDM study to the TPP work program. That study will, we did one in 2010, so it is somewhat of an update. It is meant to put together a package of strategies that the region should consider using in travel demand management to have an impact on congestion and helping to reduce travel overall. And then the final piece of our response is recognizing in the overview that we've had a lot of success, if you want to call it that, with teleworking during COVID, and that there is a new desire to relook at teleworking and keeping it going and the huge impact that it can have on reducing highway congestion. And if you could go to the next slide.
But before you move to the next slide, if I look at the first bullet point there, what I hear some folks saying is, can we take the more positive rather than the negative sort of approach and saying, no, we can't do this because, why don't we say where we have flexibility instead of talking about where we have inflexibility? I think that's one of the messages I'm hearing here. But we know inherently there are limitations on what we can do and how we can spend, what money is more flexible than others. Maybe that's a thing to think about anyway. Go ahead to the next slide that you want to talk about.
Sure, and Mr. Chair, I think you bring up a good point there. We do within the TPP talk about the regional solicitation specifically, and how that is one of the few places we do have flexibility to shift funding between modes. And it also is a source of funding that is directly under the control of TAB and the council. In other words, it doesn't come to us kind of preordained with the mode that we have to spend that funding on. So keeping that in mind, yourselves, as you begin to make decisions on the regional solicitation funding, I think is important, and something we're going to talk about a little bit with Steve's presentation after this one here. So I would just add that in there.
Okay.
The next comment that we got is about recognizing that our Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities are the most impacted by climate change. So our response to this is generally that we agree, and we think the TPP does acknowledge this in a number of places. We have a TPP work program area that is focused on equity, and currently in the draft that went out for review called for studies on safety outcomes by race and income, spending on preservation by race and income, and also analyzing impact of COVID by race and income. What we are proposing to do is add a new study into the work program that would be a larger look at equity, and we've kind of titled it roughly an equity evaluation of regional transportation investment. It would be a study that really would take an equity lens or equity perspective and ask questions about our funding processes, our planning processes, our programming and project selection processes regarding whether they are equitable, and suggesting ways that we could look at those processes or potentially change those processes. And I'm envisioning an outcome of a number of actions or strategies that the region can take towards transportation equity, with potentially some analysis of the ease of actually accomplishing the strategy, high, medium, low, easy, medium, hard type of evaluation. We are specifically talking about this work program item with MnDOT, given that a lot of our funding, as I said, does come to us through MnDOT and through statutory allocations and constitutional dedication, that we really think doing this in a broader perspective would be helpful. And so we don't have it quite all worked out yet with MnDOT, and we'll be coming back to you in the future to really give you a scope for this proposed study and information on how it's going to proceed.
Anybody have any questions or comments on this particular slide or this notion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, who was it?
Commissioner Look.
Yes, Commissioner, please.
Yeah, I guess let me just weigh in a little bit here in terms of, every year that we look at changes to the TPP, there's one thing I can count on with a high degree of certainty is this effort to move money from roadways into non-roadways. And while I appreciate the efforts that people from the Sierra Club took to as a special interest to try and advocate on their own behalf, I'm not sure that it's necessarily consistent with the needs of our area, from the standpoint that what we've seen is when you try and eliminate expansion, that doesn't eliminate drivers, and it creates unsafe situations. Highway 10 is a case in point. And so I appreciate Member Geisler's comment earlier, because it does in fact identify the fact that there's needs all across the area. And in terms of equity, just before we were talking about the successes of Southwest Light Rail and the successes of bus rapid transit, et cetera, which I think from an equity standpoint is achieving that, because there's a significant amount of money going into that. But from the standpoint of trying to shift money away from expansion, I would certainly like to hear from MnDOT on this, because all we've heard in the past is the only dollars available are preservation dollars, and trying to find expansion dollars is next to impossible. And so now we have an expansion category which might try and plug some of those holes, but we're trying to now cut away from that and reduce that even further. I'm wondering if that's really I mean, we can talk about it, but I'm wondering if that's really MnDOT's position that that's a great idea.
Ms. Vanowitz, any comment?
Mr. Chair and members, I do want to be clear that we do not currently, as part of our response, propose shifting any funding away from roads to other modes. We are proposing the Tdm study that I noted and the equity evaluation that I've noted, but at this point there is not any shift in funding taking place.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Matt Hollinshead.
Yes, Member Hollinshead.
Well, I just want to respond to Commissioner Look. First of all, I don't think clean air and clean water and the environment are a special interest. I just totally reject that. One of the hats that I wear is Conservation Chair of the North Star chapter of the Sierra Club in Minnesota. And I would just respond to the special interest slur by saying everybody breathes air, everybody drinks water, everybody needs the environment. There is nothing special about that. That is universal. Now, my second comment is, I live near the Ford site in St. Paul, and I've closely watched that for several years, and it has highlighted to me the developers of new housing and new commercial space and new real estate typically do not automatically include transit in what they define as infrastructure. What they do include almost automatically is roads, streets, sewers, sometimes public space, and always parking. So there is actually a bias and a prejudice in new real estate development that transit is not automatically included as infrastructure. It's an also ran, it's an afterthought. And so this is partially a response to Member Geisler. I appreciate the fact that he has half a district which is brand new, but I also say that real estate developers and their bankers typically have no attention paid to transit at all. When a banker scores a real estate project, guess what? It's parking and highways and roads. So I kind of push back and resist the idea that road expansion is somehow different. I think transit needs to have an equal say and an equal role in new real estate development. So I just felt that I had to make that comment. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Hollinshead. Yes, we have a gentle person approach to the next regional solicitation. Here we are already hearing, we're previewing positions here, which is interesting and important. So back to Ms. Venowitz. When we look at this equity slide 12, it's causing me to wonder about not only the climate change issues that are raised in the red print, but here we are in the middle of this pandemic, and we're seeing that this disparate sort of impact on people of color with health outcomes. They were already in a disadvantaged position generally with respect to health outcomes, and now during COVID, that's even been exacerbated more. The economic challenges during COVID have fallen on primarily, I think, on people of color. This isn't to tell you that I think we should modify this significantly, but it does tell me that when we get to the next regional solicitation, we're going to have a really interesting conversation, I think, around some of these issues of equity. And we had talked about it in the past, and we had said we're going out to the community of color, and we're going to find out what those needs are. And so instead of making assumptions, I think we have to just remember that when the time comes and we need to get to work on the regional solicitation, let's not forget to invite people in that are being impacted so that we get their input, whether it's virtual or in person to person, on a first-hand basis. So just that observation as well. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes. Is that member Sanger again?
a couple of comments. First of all, I just wanted to echo for the comments that member Hollingshed just made, and I thank him for that. My second point is, I think that we should consider, and you may want to put this in your comments or not, but I think the TAB needs to consider that in the regional solicitation process going forward, we have a category of points allocated for the impact of the project on climate change, or the impact of the project on trying to mitigate climate change, and that would be one way of helping to assure that projects that we do approve and fund are on the good side of helping to deal with climate change instead of exacerbating them. So I hope you would do that. And then my third comment goes back to at the beginning, one of the comments that Ms. Venowitz referred to was the emphasis that the council typically places on land use planning, and also the comment about dealing with parking issues. All true, but I think we have to acknowledge that if we support more land use planning for more density, and if we encourage minimization of parking places, that the flip side of that means we also have to support increased transit so that people who live in those areas can get from point A to point B without needing to have so many cars. And right now what I see is an emphasis on trying to minimize parking, but no emphasis on the corresponding need to increase transit.
All right, thank you for those observations, and I'm sure Elaine's taking good notes here. And so when we get to the next solicitation, we can have these very, very interesting conversations, I think. All right, Ms. Venowitz, back to you.
Sure, let's move to slide 13, and I'm going to go through the last couple slides really quickly because I think in the interest of getting to the next discussion item, and I would invite TAB members, if you on your own time go through this PowerPoint or actually go through the comments and responses, if you want to send us an email or suggestions on additional ways to respond or additional text or changes that you think would be appropriate in the TPP, we certainly can accept that. We are going to be working on the changes through the next couple weeks, and then we'll be back to you as a reminder in October for the final recommendation for adoption of the TPP update. So quickly, this slide looks at the comment on best practice in parking policy. As a part of our response, we point people to the land use chapter, which has quite a bit of discussion about land use and good planning for transit, minimizing parking. We have a couple tools that are linked in that chapter for best practices, and that we provide technical assistance regarding parking. Also, we, as part of our response, we're again pointing to the travel demand management work program item that we are adding to the TPP, which will help us prioritize strategies for TDM. If you could go to the next slide. A couple other changes that we are making to the TPP in response to comments. We're updating our reference to ACP 50s to only be to ACPs, which works with the council's recent work in updating the evolution of ACPs. We are changing some wording in Appendix F to clarify that interchange conversions can happen not only based upon safety needs, but from other needs that might be identified. We are noting that Washington County is the lead of the Trunk Highway 36 transit study. And then we have also made some text updates to the transit way status in the transit chapter. So that is the bulk of the changes that are taking place in the TPP update itself. Most of it is in the work program chapter where we are adding additional activities and work. And with that, next slide, a quick, I did want to also talk about some of these comments really are just too big to address immediately or in this specific update. So some of them that we are kind of keeping in mind and passing on and discussing with our community development division relate to how we will be approaching the 2050 plan update, which is really starting out this year and will be getting fully underway in 2021. And some of those are, how do we address climate change? That is a big discussion. It goes well beyond just transportation, though transportation is a big part of it. And so continuing that discussion with TAB and our council members for 2050, continuing to talk about reducing racial inequities. What are the strategies? How do we want to approach that as a region? What is transportation's role in helping to do that? Also having a regional vision that better connects transportation, jobs, housing, economic development as part of our 2050 plan. And then related to that, tying our major investments to the regional goals and outcomes that we have identified.
On this slide 15, what's different about these comments versus what's in, I take it it's Thrive 2040 is what you're talking about modifying for 2050? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, Mr. Chair and members, we are just gearing up to start the process for the next 2050 plan development. That's the update to Thrive. And as part of that, we will be creating a 2050 transportation policy plan, which falls under the umbrella of the 2050 plan. So that is a multi-year process that we are kicking off. It is primarily led by community development, but we have an integrated team that is just kicking off and talking about the big issues that we need to incorporate into that plan. And I'll let Council Member Barber chime in here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's part of the reason why we're actually doing this incremental update of the transportation policy plan, because of the timing of the windows of when the next version of Thrive, so the 2050 plan, that way that document will inform the actual full, more comprehensive update of the transportation policy plan. So then those documents will align.
So, Member Barber, how do these comments on slide 15 align with what's presently in the Thrive 2040 document?
There are things in the 2040 document along these lines. I think that clearly, whether you look at the public comment we're getting, either on this version of the TPP update or the last version of the TPP update, and even the things that we've learned about the impacts of Thrive already, as well as the impacts on climate and disparities. We've learned a lot, and all of that will inform what goes into that next version of the plan. So there's some things that are in the 2040 plan. I expect there will be more expanded discussion on all of these items in the 2050 plan.
All right, so this is just an observation as serving as chair of this organization for the past couple of years, and the people that are on this tab with us, all of us. I see a group of people here that are really interested in looking at the far horizon, you know, and thinking about, to use that old Wayne Gretzky expression, skate to where the puck's going to be, not where it is right now. And so in the work that we want to be doing in the next regional solicitation, I could see where all of these things that are on slide 15 are things that this group of TAB members, unlike any group I've seen before, really want to be thinking about and planning for, and making sure that the regional solicitation aligns with these long-term goals and vision that we probably all have for the region in these different areas to make it a ever better place. So just keep that in mind as we go forward here, that this group is going to push hard, I think, on the looking forward. You know, it's not easy work, but you don't want to have the future just be something that happens to you.
Right. And I think the practices of different groups, whether it's TAB or other of our other standing committees or advisory committees, really serves to inform and build that framework of what goes into that 2050 plan. So just like the 2040 plan, we just built all of our comprehensive plans in alignment with 2040, and that process will happen again after the 2050 plan. But these things that we're doing and discussions that we're having, even on things like the regional solicitation, really helps establish that framework. And so, yes, I definitely, think we should continue that work, and even as we look at how we build out planning for future regional solicitations, because all of these comments and information that we bring in certainly gets relayed to our staff, gets relayed to other council members who all will have roles in that building out that 2050 plan. So I think your point is very well taken.
All right, good. And then for Ms. Venowitz, what I would say is that based on the conversation we've just had, when you make the recommended language changes in the TPP that reflect these different issues that were raised, if we can get that proposed language or those proposed language modifications maybe 10 days in advance of the meeting, I think people are going to want to look at that language and make sure it's redlined so they can see where the proposed changes are. And then people can send in their suggestions in advance, and then you have a chance before the tab to see if you want to modify any of that language, and then we can have a more fruitful discussion at the tab meeting in October. Does that work?
Sure, we can do that. It'll be changes through a number of chapters, but we'll try to compile it in a way that's more understandable.
Okay, that's what. However, I know you'll do it in a way that will be easily trackable.
Okay, I think I have one more slide, and then I'm going to let Steve take over here. Okay, yeah. We're done. Yeah.
Go ahead. And we're going to have that discussion right now because it's already 2:30, past 2:30. So I thought we'd be done with everything here easily by 2:30, but we got a lot of inquisitive minds here. So my question here now, with respect to what Steve was going to talk about, these regional solicitation draft funding scenarios, we've already had to have two of our members jump off for other calls. Is this something that could wait for the October meeting, or do you think it's important that we do it now?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we really have 4 tab meetings to get to a final decision in December on the scenarios. The October meeting is the first meeting at which you'll see various funding scenarios brought to this group, a first look. And so the presentation that we added to the amended agenda today was to give members a chance, a first chance to look at the types of concepts, theoretical concepts of funding scenarios. We've put together 4 of them to talk about, but either today or at the October meeting too, this group will have a chance to add additional ones or remove some that we've put together.
Yeah, no, I hate to put you on the spot like that because I can tell from what you're saying that it's worthwhile having time to think about these different models that you've set forth here. Mm-hmm. Can people give us can we do this in 15 minutes, do you think, Steve? 15, 20 minutes? What would be the preference? So you want to do it now for 15 or 20 minutes while we're all together, or do you want to try to do it next time? You okay? I don't see a lot of objections. Let's keep going here, and we'll get this as quickly as we can. Then Mr. Chair, for a month.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Is that member Deanne?
Just before we get into that, I would like to reserve some time at the next meeting. I have several comments from the prior discussion, which I think are germane, but I'm not going to make them now because of the time.
All right, thank you. Yeah, you're certainly welcome to make them at the next meeting.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a few slides here. Again, this is showing you've seen this table from Elaine in the past, the number of applications submitted. Here we're starting to put the dollars as to what that midpoint might be. We've received several questions as to the midpoint of those funding ranges and what those funding ranges will look like given the dollars available. So next slide, please. So we have $198 million available. You may remember from the application that was approved by this committee, we did set aside 2.5%, so that equates to about $5 million, not to be allocated this cycle, but instead to be allocated 2 years from now. And in that intervening time, we'd come up with what a unique project is and how to score it. But again, so that comes off the top. So we go down from $198 million, leaving $193 million to be allocated among the 11 remaining application categories. So next slide, please. We've also received several questions given all the new rules and things that were approved on related to transit. So just to refresh this committee, we did vote to shift $5 million, the midpoint $5 million to transit. You may remember that conversation. $4 million came out of roadways, $1 million came out of the bicycle pedestrian categories. We did set aside the up to $7 million for non-ABRT, so the remaining what we're calling bus rapid transit projects. 4 of those were submitted through the application process, and we did you did approve having at least one project that was essentially outside of the Beltway, outside of transit market areas 1 and 2, called a new market transit new market guarantee. In fact, we had 15 projects that were submitted that will fulfill that requirement. So quite a few projects submitted there. So just to do the math quickly, again, starting from that midpoint, which you do or you don't have to approve in the end, we started about 58 million. We take out the 25 million that you approved today would be set aside for ABRT to be decided in April. If you continue doing that same $7 million for the TMOs and the TDM set aside, that leaves $26 million left to go to transit expansion and transit modernization. So that's what we're working on the transit side. So you can keep this as kind of good information as we start developing the scenarios for next month. So next slide, please. So here we've drafted up 4 scenarios. Again, you don't have the projects or the project lists yet, and that's on purpose to some extent because we're trying to talk in the conceptual at this point. So let me just quickly go through these and then see if you want to add any additional or have any other ideas. So one would be the midpoint. That's what you've approved the last 3 cycles, 2014, 16, and 18. We go to the midpoint of those funding ranges, and then the projects are divvied up based on the number of applications submitted in each category. So that's consistent with what we've done you've selected the last 3 times. Here's 3 other ideas. One is focusing on getting more projects across the region. In this case, we would follow that same midpoints for the modes, so we wouldn't shift between the modes, but we'd focus on the smaller project categories. Some of those would be the pedestrian facilities, safe routes to school, spot mobility and safety, traffic management technologies. Some of those are the smaller project categories. So the thought here is that you want to get a bunch more projects spread across the region, but those are going to be smaller projects. Concept number 3 is bigger projects. Again, this doesn't shift any money between the modes, keeps that constant, but we're focusing on the larger project categories. And in many cases, this does leverage the most outside dollars to get the most transportation dollars into the system. Some of those categories would be the strategic capacity, the new interchanges. In the bike ped, it's the multi-use trails. Oftentimes those projects, the bigger projects especially, are bringing more than the 80-20%. So they're bringing a lot of local dollars to the table to deliver those projects. So that's the concept with bigger projects, more outside leveraging. Number 4 would be a carryover here from the last presentation you just heard about. This would be a response to the TIP and the TPP comments. So here would be the first place where we would, a scenario where we would shift money. In this case, we would shift about $10 or $11 million from roadways to bicycle pedestrian to get to that top end of that bike ped range, which is about 20% of the whole pot of money, $193 million. We wouldn't propose to shift any to transit. Again, we already shifted $5 million over to transit as part of this midpoint discussion several months ago. So it just would be with bike ped. I could see another iteration of this probably being within the roadways categories, selecting more projects that were more in the reconstruction area and less in the more expansion strategic capacity area. I think that would align with the comments, the TPP comments we received and just the discussion I just heard. So there's probably two parts to that number 4. So those were the 4 ideas, Mr. Chair, that we had, but we don't want to have 10 scenarios brought back to you. That's almost too many. Eventually we want to get down to a manageable number, maybe 3 or so coming into November. But we do want to obviously give TAB an opportunity to say, hey, here's a concept we've been thinking about, and we can see if it's feasible to put together a funding scenario. The other one we did think about was related to the TPP comments was on equity. Could we do some shifting or changing based on equity? And it was really tough to think through that, to tell you the truth, just given the constraints of the application, the points, where those equity bonus projects fell on the list. So that was maybe difficult for us to do this time, but something that we could think about in the future. So back to you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. That was a good, concise presentation and very helpful, I think. Questions from TAB members, comments for now? Food for thought for next month, potentially? Well, obviously, but anybody have any questions they want to raise with Steve now? Okay, I'm not seeing anything.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, this sounds like Commissioner Look.
Sorry, Member Geisler.
Member Geisler, okay.
Yeah, I like the variety that we're getting here with the funding scenarios, a little different look to what we're doing. So I applaud staff for thinking a little differently here. I do think that item number 4 may be a little too far to go, since that would effectively move 15 million out of roadways at net, which is two plus projects, which is a pretty big shift year over year. Not to say that those areas don't need it, but moving 15 million, we had a hard time getting the 5 million moved around when we had that discussion. So that might be a big move. So I would like to see a better focus on 1, 2, and 3, as at least for, if staff's got to budget their time, that's where I'd recommend personally. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that comment. It's good guidance for everybody on the tab as well, I think. Other comments from anybody at this point in time? Okay, Steve, this is good material. If you think you want to supplement it in any way, you can get it to Elaine and she can get it out to folks to be thinking about in advance.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And that last slide of that PowerPoint did show the schedule coming up. And tomorrow, the scores at funding and programming will be finalized. So we're hearing scoring appeals tomorrow. And at that point, we'll send out what those rank lists are. And you can see where all the projects came in with the final scores. But then really, you've got 3 meetings where you'll have funding scenarios that you can tweak them, ask us for different ones. So hopefully plenty of time here to come to a decision.
All right, good. Well, this is very helpful information. Who's on the scoring challenge determination committee?
Like in the past, that is our funding and programming committee. They hear both the qualifications appeals, which took place earlier this summer, and the scoring appeals. And so that they're really the workhorse on the technical committee, and they will be hearing those tomorrow afternoon.
I don't recall that we've had any or maybe a few scoring challenges advanced, where they could come in front of the full tab and plead their case on scoring. Do you recall?
Not, Mr. Chair, and members, not recently. We've had some qualification issues that certainly have been, that last time rose up on the St. Paul Unique Project charging stations. But scoring, usually it's more technical in nature. And so that's why we keep it at that level.
Yeah, I think that's something for the tab to think about as well. And I think that historical practice is a good one of letting the technical people handle the scoring challenges based upon their knowledge, and then leave other issues to us that could be appealable. So, tab members, thank you for your patience today. As we, I thought we'd be done before 2:30, but boy, that was there was a lot of inquisitive minds there with some really good content. So thanks for caring about this work and thinking it through. And we will see you in a month. So,
Mr. Chair, if I may, just one quick question.
Yes, Member Geithler.
Steve, I think, I totally agree with the chair as far as leaving it to tack it on those decisions. I would love to see a summary of what any of those issues were, though, just what was brought forth and what's there, just so we can, as we talk about scoring and revising in the future, we hear what people are actually appealing or what they're having trouble with. So we can understand that better. Just, it doesn't have to come in this cycle, but later, at a later date, as you're doing that work.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Member Geisler. That is something that Elaine and the rest of the staff can bring back to this group. Yeah.
Okay, Member Dugan, while we've got everybody here, or most of us here, do you want to raise the issues that you thought were important in time here? Or do you want to wait till next month?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the interest of time, I will wait. They were more too much on the TPP, but on to follow up on the comments of Commissioner Look and Member Geisler and Member Hollinshead.
Okay, thank you. Member Commissioner Gattel, did you have a comment?
No, I just wanted to say goodbye to everybody and thank you for this meeting. And I thought the conversation was great and very robust as well. And I'm really excited to hear that we're talking about this. This is something that's near and dear at the county level as well.
Very good. Okay. Well, everybody, we will adjourn the meeting and look forward to seeing y'all in the virtual world next month.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.